The sky above Mordor tore open without warning, a jagged seam in reality that crackled with energy unfamiliar to even the most attuned servants of the Dark Lord. The ground shivered beneath invisible pressure, and a sudden wind carried with it an odor of ozone and burning metal. From this rift, a figure emerged, standing impossibly tall and radiating a presence that distorted both light and shadow. His warplate gleamed like golden sunlight, yet its weight suggested power unimaginable, and his eyes burned with intelligence and authority that no mortal could fully comprehend. The lands themselves seemed to recoil from him, as if aware that this was not a creature of Middle-earth, but something far beyond its scope. The Emperor of mankind, master of the Imperium, had been ripped from the 41st millennium by a warp rupture of catastrophic proportions. His arrival was violent yet controlled. He had maintained perfect balance through the dimensional transition, but the absence of warp energy in Middle-earth immediately limited his psychic senses. He felt the pulse of life, the flow of battle, and the threads of destiny around him. Yet the signals were faint, as if muted by some invisible veil. Unlike the battlefields of the Imperium, where humanity was bound by hierarchy and the warp itself amplified his mind, here he had only himself and the laws of a world untouched by his dominion. He surveyed the plains of Gorgoroth below, noting the smoking vents, jagged rocks, and the looming silhouette of Barad-dûr. In the distance, the eye of Sauron flickered, sensing the disruption, but unable to comprehend the nature of this new arrival. To a being accustomed to commanding entire fleets and crusades, Sauron's gaze was a curiosity rather than a threat. The Dark Lord's magic pulsed in waves of malice and deceit, yet it lacked the precision and scale of a human mind sharpened by 10,000 years of war. Still, the Emperor recognized that underestimating this world's magic could be costly. From the north, scouts of Gondor and the remnants of Arnor approached cautiously. They had never seen a man or any being of such stature or radiance. Even Aragorn, heir of Isildur, felt the stirrings of awe tempered by wariness. Rumors of a godlike warrior in golden armor spread swiftly, and the free peoples debated whether to see him as a savior, a threat, or some manifestation of divine providence. The Emperor, understanding the delicacy of first impressions, allowed his presence to communicate power without aggression. He did not stride toward them as a conqueror, but remained a sentinel at the edge of Mordor, letting his calm authority radiate. He extended his senses, probing the lands for subtle indications of corruption, of power used for destruction. He sensed the orc patrols moving blindly in the ash, their minds narrow and violent but predictable. Trolls lumbered behind them, and the stench of Mordor's industry, sulfur, rot, and blood, told stories of conquest and subjugation. Even without the warp, his analytical mind quickly deduced the hierarchy of command and the weaknesses in enemy formations. Yet he also noted the absence of industrial-scale weapons and the limits of this world's magic. Here, combat was a mixture of skill, courage, and raw power, an environment where brute intelligence could shape outcomes but not automate victory. The first confrontation came not with blades, but with vision. From the Palantir atop Minas Ithil, Sauron sensed the anomaly, a being whose presence tore at the edges of reality itself. The eye flared in anger and curiosity, sending tendrils of shadow to probe and test. The Emperor felt the pull, subtle yet insistent, a psychic tug that Middle-earth could manage only partially. He recognized the faint signal for what it was, a warning, a challenge, and a probe. Here was a power different from the warp, one bound by a world's natural order, yet dangerous enough to require immediate attention. Cautious yet decisive, he descended into Gorgoroth, moving over lava-cracked soil and shattered rock with the precision of a commander studying a battlefield. His mind catalogued every ridge, every natural choke point, every fortification around Barad-dûr. He noted the orc encampments and minor fortresses, realizing that though these forces were numerous, they lacked coordination beyond instinct and terror. A single wave of disciplined strike forces could dismantle the enemy if applied strategically, a thought that thrilled the Emperor's tactical mind. Yet he restrained himself. He would not yet intervene openly. By midday, a group of Gondorian scouts cautiously approached, led by a young captain armed with a sword and shield. They halted at a safe distance, eyes wide with awe. The Emperor studied them, noting fear, loyalty, and determination, the same traits that had fueled countless crusades in his own universe. Raising his hand slightly, he projected calm authority, a non-verbal signal that he meant no immediate harm. He understood the cultural and psychological dynamics at play. In a world governed by prophecy and honor, appearances carried as much weight as deeds. The scouts reported back to their leaders. Elrond, Aragorn, and other representatives convened to discuss the implications of this golden warrior in their lands. Questions arose. Was he a herald of divine aid, a weapon of fate, or something more terrifying, a being whose power could dominate or disrupt the balance of Middle-earth itself? The council debated the prudence of engaging him, knowing that any misstep could trigger conflict with a being capable of unmaking armies. The Emperor, meanwhile, remained at the edge of Mordor, sensing the tension, calculating the probability of misunderstandings, and preparing to act with precision if necessary. Through the smoky horizon, the first signs of Sauron's counteractions became visible. Dark figures, Nazgûl riding winged steeds, surveyed the lands. Their presence sent subtle waves of fear, and though the Emperor could sense their intent, he noted the limitations of their perception. They could intimidate mortals, but against him, their effect was negligible. Yet he remained cautious. In a world governed by magic and prophecy, reckless demonstrations of power could lead to unforeseen consequences. Here, subtlety and restraint were as important as overwhelming force. As night fell, the land seemed to tremble beneath the weight of history and potential. Mordor itself exhaled hot, sulfuric breath, and the distant silhouette of Barad-dûr became a looming monolith against a crimson sky. The Emperor's mind worked constantly, cataloging every potential threat, calculating outcomes, and considering alliances. He recognized that first impressions were decisive. If he acted too aggressively, he could unite all Middle-earth against him. If too passive, Sauron might exploit hesitation. He was a being of foresight, and in this unfamiliar world, foresight was survival. The Emperor's presence alone altered the dynamics of Middle-earth. Orcs faltered where they marched. Men whispered of hope and terror in equal measure, and the balance of fate seemed to shift subtly. Though he had not yet struck a blow, he had already reshaped perceptions, both mortal and dark. The first step in this collision of universes was not destruction, but calculation, observation, and measured display of power. And in the council halls of elves and men, a question began to stir. Could this being be trusted? And what would he demand in return for his intervention? By the time the first council convened at Rivendell, news of the golden-armored stranger had spread through the lands like wildfire. Messengers carried tales of his sudden arrival, of the rift that had split the sky above Mordor, and of his silent, commanding presence that caused even seasoned scouts to hesitate. Elrond's chamber was thick with anticipation, and the air smelled faintly of candle wax and heated stone. Aragorn stood among the assembled leaders, his eyes narrowed, measuring this newcomer's potential and risk. Even Legolas and Gimli, attuned to the nuances of battle and magic, felt a shiver of uncertainty. The Emperor of Mankind, however, entered quietly, warplate gleaming under the soft glow of the hall, and exuded a presence that made even the immortal elves instinctively pause in deference. The council began with polite caution, voices measured as they debated who or what this being truly was. Was he a god, a powerful sorcerer, or a warrior of some ancient lineage lost to history? The Emperor observed without interrupting, analyzing every detail, the posture of the council, the subtleties in their tone, the flickers of fear or hope in their eyes. He understood that Middle-earth operated differently from the Imperium. Here, prophecy, courage, and moral choice governed outcomes more than brute force or psychic dominance. Yet even so, the principles of strategy, leadership, and battlefield awareness remained universal. Elrond, the master of foresight among elves, spoke first. This being, his power is unlike any we have witnessed, yet we cannot judge him solely by strength. In Middle-earth, even the mightiest must answer to honor and the balance of fate. Aragorn added, "We have fought many battles against darkness, yet this is different. I have seen men falter before fear, but the courage in his presence does not waver. Still, can we trust him?" The Emperor's eyes scanned the room, noting the careful phrasing of every sentence. Here, words themselves were weapons, as precise as a blade in the wrong hands. To demonstrate his capabilities without causing panic or alienation, the Emperor performed a series of controlled displays. He lifted massive boulders with ease, redirecting them to prevent damage to the whole structure. He demonstrated combat stances and precision that allowed him to neutralize simulated threats in the training yard outside. Each demonstration was deliberate, measured, and calculated to impress without instilling terror. The elves watched in awe, noting the fluidity of movement and the power that radiated from every action. The humans whispered of a protector sent by higher powers. Even Gimli, typically blunt and skeptical, could not hide his respect for the sheer skill and efficiency demonstrated. Meanwhile, Sauron's influence began to creep subtly into Middle-earth's awareness. Through the Palantir and other dark networks, he observed the stranger with a mixture of rage and curiosity. Nazgul moved cautiously, testing the boundaries of perception, their wails echoing faintly over distant mountains. The Emperor, perceiving these incursions, began to formulate preemptive strategies. He understood that while Middle-earth did not possess warp energy, its magic and spiritual structures could be leveraged strategically. Shadows and fear, prophecy and moral choice, these were not weapons in the Imperium's sense, but they were forces to be respected, measured, and exploited carefully. The Emperor proposed a plan to the council, to form a coalition to push Sauron's forces from the northern plains of Mordor before they could consolidate. He emphasized coordination, supply lines, and the strategic use of terrain. Elrond and Aragorn were impressed by the depth of planning, noting the integration of intelligence gathering, rapid response, and psychological warfare. Yet questions arose. If the Emperor's intervention was so decisive, what checks could be placed upon him? Could one being wield such influence without altering the natural course of Middle-earth forever? The council wrestled with these questions, even as they agreed on the need for immediate action. Outside the council, the Emperor's presence created ripples across the land.
Orc patrols reported strange sensations, unease, a sense of inevitability. The beasts of Mordor faltered, uncertain of the sudden imbalance in their dominion. Among the free peoples, rumors spread rapidly. Some called him a savior. Others whispered of a godlike tyrant whose favor could be as dangerous as the enemy's sword. In both cases, the emperor's careful restraint magnified his influence. He had not acted overtly, yet the world responded as though he had already had.
The emperor also began to adapt to the limitations imposed by Middle-earth. His psychic powers, dampened by the lack of warp energy, functioned at roughly 70% efficiency. He could sense life and potential outcomes, but the immediacy and clarity of perception were reduced. Yet his physical abilities, strength, speed, reflexes, remained virtually unaffected. He realized that strategy, cunning, and selective demonstration of power would be key in influencing allies and intimidating enemies. Each step forward required restraint and judgment, an understanding of the moral and metaphysical landscape as much as the tactical one. Tensions rose as debate continued within the council. Some leaders feared that relying on a single, godlike figure would undermine Middle-earth's traditions of courage and self-determination. Others argued that survival against Sauron required extraordinary measures. Aragorn, weighing both perspectives, turned to the emperor. "We cannot fight as we once did. If you lend your strength, we must ensure that freedom and honor are preserved, or all will be lost." The emperor inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the delicate balance. Power without principle, he knew, was as dangerous in this world as it was in his own. The northern reaches of Mordor lay shrouded in perpetual twilight, a land of blackened stone, poisoned air, and rivers of molten rock. Here, the Emperor of Mankind chose to demonstrate his capabilities fully, though with deliberate restraint. His forces consisted not of entire legions, as in the 41st millennium, but a coalition of elves, men, and a few dwarves, each trained in their own forms of combat, each skilled in the ways of this world. For the Emperor, the challenge was not merely defeating the enemy, it was integrating these mortal warriors into a strategy that relied as much on cooperation and morale as it did on sheer power. He had quickly adapted to Middle-earth's physical laws, though the absence of the warp meant that his psychic abilities were limited. He could still sense currents of life and detect the emotional state of those around him, but he could not manipulate matter or energy as effortlessly as he could in his own universe. Even so, he had learned to compensate. Timing, precision, and psychological dominance became tools as effective as psychic strikes. Orc patrols, when first confronted, faltered under the weight of his presence. The Emperor did not strike immediately. He allowed their terror to spread, observing how the enemy's command structures unraveled under pressure. The first engagement came near a series of jagged ridges that formed natural choke points. The Emperor had studied these formations carefully, understanding that orcs and trolls relied heavily on brute force and numbers. He positioned his allies to exploit terrain advantages, archers on high ground, infantry blocking narrow passes, and covert squads maneuvering behind enemy lines. When the orc war band advanced, the Emperor moved like a singular storm. His movements were a blend of martial artistry and sheer force, each strike calculated to incapacitate without unnecessary waste. Trolls fell with precision, orcs scattered, and his allies, inspired by his competence, fought with newfound confidence. Yet, even in victory, adaptation remained crucial. Spells cast by minor servants of Sauron and residual dark magic interfered with his psychic perception. He noted the subtle ripple in the air whenever an enchanted amulet or cursed banner was present. These were not full-scale threats, but the Emperor recognized that Middle-earth's magic was not to be underestimated. He adjusted his tactics, relying on observation, prediction, and rapid execution rather than psychic dominance. He had won battles in the 41st millennium, but never in a world where magic could influence both minds and terrain. Meanwhile, Sauron's influence began to manifest in subtler ways. The Dark Lord did not confront the Emperor directly. He was patient, cunning, and aware that raw power alone might not suffice against a being who could outthink entire armies. Instead, Sauron manipulated the perceptions and fears of Middle-earth's mortals. Rumors of betrayal spread among men, whispers of divine wrath reached the ears of elves, and moral uncertainty began to creep into the ranks of those who might have been allies. The Emperor, observing these disruptions, recognized the parallels with chaos infiltration in the 41st millennium. He countered through example, discipline, and visible competence, demonstrating that fear and superstition could be overcome by order and decisiveness. A morally complex choice arose during a minor engagement. The Emperor discovered that a village of innocents was being used as bait by orcs to delay his advance. He could destroy the orcs outright with overwhelming force, risking collateral damage to the village, or he could devise a tactical maneuver that preserved the lives of the innocents but allowed some orcs to escape. After a moment's calculation, he chose restraint, orchestrating a flanking maneuver that routed the enemy while protecting civilians. This decision highlighted the fundamental difference between Middle-earth and his own universe. Raw victory was not the only measure. The preservation of moral integrity and the protection of innocence mattered. As the battle drew to a close, the Emperor surveyed the results. The northern approaches of Mordor were under partial control, and the enemy had been humiliated and disorganized. Yet he understood that this was merely the first stage of a much larger conflict. Sauron's forces were numerous, and their dark magic could not be ignored. The Emperor began planning the next phase, which would involve the strategic deployment of his allies, careful use of his abilities, and preparation for direct confrontation with the Dark Lord's manifestations. Each decision was made with the awareness that his actions could permanently alter Middle-earth's trajectory. Throughout the engagement, the Emperor's presence reshaped more than the battlefield. Orcs reported panic and confusion. Humans gained newfound courage, and elves observed the arrival of a being who, though alien, embodied qualities they had long revered: wisdom, skill, and unwavering focus. Even the land itself seemed to respond. Rivers flowed more predictably, winds shifted to carry scents and sounds in advantageous ways, and the air vibrated subtly with the weight of fate recalibrated. He was not just a warrior. He was a fulcrum around which the threads of destiny began to pivot. By nightfall, the Emperor had secured a temporary staging ground near the northern foothills of Mordor. His forces, tired but inspired, established defenses and observed the enemy from a distance. He used this respite to further study Middle-earth's unique metaphysics, cataloging the limitations of his psychic abilities and devising ways to exploit terrain, morale, and magical effects.
The collision of two universes was underway, and the Emperor understood that the coming confrontations would demand not only strength, but patience, wisdom, and a deep appreciation for the subtle interplay of fate, courage, and magic in this world.
Barad-dûr loomed ahead like a black wound upon the horizon, its spires clawing at the blood-red sky. The Emperor of Mankind, standing atop a jagged ridge with his allied forces arrayed before him, surveyed the Dark Lord's fortress with meticulous precision. Here, at the heart of Sauron's domain, strategy would meet its ultimate test. The northern battles had revealed the Emperor's adaptability, but this siege would confront him with the full measure of Middle-earth's magic, the cunning of its Dark Lord, and the moral weight of intervention. Every step required foresight. Every move could ripple across the lands for generations. The Emperor's forces were a blend of races and cultures. Elven archers moved with fluid grace along the cliffs, their arrows carrying silent judgment. Human infantry formed disciplined formations, shields interlocking, ready to withstand both siege engines and orcish charges. Dwarves, with axes and hammers gleaming, took up positions in natural choke points, their endurance legendary. Even within this coalition, he had to maintain cohesion. Differences in language, strategy, and worldview meant constant recalibration of orders. Yet the Emperor's clarity of mind and calm authority ensured cooperation without coercion. The first assault wave began under the cover of darkness. Orcs and trolls poured from Barad-dûr's gates, but the Emperor had prepared ambushes, traps, and flanking maneuvers that exploited both terrain and enemy psychology. His physical prowess was awe-inspiring. He moved faster than any human could follow, strikes precise enough to incapacitate multiple foes without chaotic overkill. Yet he restrained himself deliberately. Total destruction would not only risk collateral damage, but also challenge the natural order of Middle-earth, something even the Emperor, master of war, respected in this foreign land. Sauron's response was swift and cunning. Dark spells radiated from the fortress, warping perception and bending reality subtly to confuse and demoralize the attacking forces. Orc captains received illusions of betrayal, human warriors glimpsed visions of doom, and the terrain itself seemed to conspire against the coalition. The Emperor, sensing the metaphysical disruption, adapted instantly. He ordered his archers to fire in coordinated volleys that exploited shadows, positioned infantry in shifting formations, and used psychological dominance to counter fear with discipline. His presence alone, a being whose authority transcended conventional comprehension, inspired awe and confidence. A pivotal moment arrived when a massive troll, empowered by dark enchantments, charged the coalition's center. The creature's strength could have crushed men and elves alike, yet the Emperor met it directly. He did not rely on psychic power, which remained muted by Middle-earth's rules, but on calculated martial technique and overwhelming physical superiority. In a sequence of movements faster than any eye could track, the troll was neutralized without collapse of the surrounding forces. This demonstration of controlled might impressed allies and reminded enemies that raw brutality was not the measure of victory here. Strategy, precision, and judgment mattered as much as strength. Midway through the siege, a moral challenge presented itself. A contingent of Sauron's lesser captains attempted to surrender,
offering critical intelligence in exchange for clemency. The emperor's first instinct, conditioned by 10 millennia of brutal warfare, was to accept, recognizing the tactical advantage. Yet he paused, weighing the consequences. Mercy could inspire loyalty or fear of reprisal. Harsh judgment could sow obedience, but at the cost of moral corruption. He chose balance. The captains were spared, but placed under strict supervision, their actions dictated by necessity rather than ideology. This decision reflected an understanding that victory in Middle-earth required more than the elimination of enemies. It required the preservation of the moral fabric of the world.
As the siege continued, Sauron manifested more directly through his servants and sorceries. Phantasms, shadowy avatars, and corrupted beasts tested the coalition relentlessly. Yet the Emperor's command, his calculated displays of skill, and the synchronization of diverse forces countered every assault. Even the Palantiri seemed to quiver under his attention. Though he could not fully interact with their magic, his understanding of perception and influence allowed subtle manipulation of outcomes. Every move was designed to maintain momentum without trampling the ethical and mystical boundaries that defined Middle-earth. By the third day, Barad-dûr's outer defenses were breached, but the Emperor recognized that the fortress itself was not merely a physical structure, it was a nexus of dark will and magical power. Destruction here could fracture the balance of reality itself, releasing forces beyond comprehension. He opted for precision strikes, targeting key fortifications and disrupting command rather than indiscriminate bombardment. Siege engines, coordinated assaults, and controlled infiltration by allied elves and dwarves began to undermine Sauron's control, though always with the careful awareness that collateral damage could not be ignored. Alliances within the coalition faced stress. Humans feared reliance on a being whose power dwarfed all others. Elves worried about potential domination, and dwarves remained skeptical of any force not tested by their own rigor. The Emperor addressed these concerns not through force, but by demonstrating competence and fairness. His tactical brilliance, combined with visible restraint, reinforced trust. He was not a conqueror in this realm. He was a strategist, a guide, and a protector, operating within limits imposed by morality, metaphysics, and circumstance. As night fell over Mordor, the coalition set final positions for the decisive phase. Fires burned in the distance, shadows danced unnaturally, and the air vibrated with tension as both sides prepared for confrontation. The Emperor, observing from the ridgeline, catalogued every factor: terrain, morale, magical interference, enemy capabilities. Even with limitations, he remained a force unmatched in precision, foresight, and execution. Sauron's ultimate test awaited him within the heart of Barad-dûr. But the Emperor had already proven that the collision of two universes could yield victories without sacrificing principle. The siege had transformed the northern plains of Mordor. Orc morale was broken, alliances strengthened, and the strategic landscape altered irrevocably. Yet the Emperor knew that the coming confrontation with Sauron himself would require not only skill, but philosophical clarity. To destroy the Dark Lord outright would risk destabilizing Middle-earth, yet hesitation could allow evil to persist. The tension between decisive action and moral restraint would define the final stages of this extraordinary campaign.
The heart of Barad-dûr loomed before the coalition like a living nightmare. Towers entwined with shadow, and the eye of Sauron burned red across the sky, unblinking and omniscient.
The Emperor of Mankind advanced with his allies, aware that this was the crucible where strategy, morality, and sheer strength would converge. Unlike any battlefield in the 41st millennium, here the stakes were intertwined with fate itself. Each action could ripple across centuries, influencing the world long after Sauron's immediate threat had been neutralized. The approach to the fortress was fraught with dangers beyond mere orc and troll patrols. Dark enchantments distorted perception, twisting paths and creating illusions designed to lure the coalition into ambushes. The Emperor adapted instantly, employing both physical and mental acuity. He guided troops with precise commands, using subtle hand signals and voice cues to navigate through shifting corridors and deceptive terrain. His allies followed with awe and discipline, trusting in a being whose presence inspired both fear and hope. Even those skeptical of relying on a foreign power found themselves reassured by his competence and measured authority. Upon entering the outer sanctums, the Emperor faced Sauron's elite defenders, wraith-like servants imbued with the Dark Lord's malice and corrupted beasts of immense size and strength. The Emperor's physical capabilities allowed him to engage directly, neutralizing threats with controlled strikes that minimized risk to allies. Though his psychic component of his power remained partially suppressed, he compensated with strategy, timing, and anticipation. Each move was calculated, demonstrating both martial skill and the application of knowledge accumulated from centuries of command. Allies observed his restraint, realizing that power could be wielded responsibly, even in the face of overwhelming threat. In a morally complex choice, the Emperor discovered prisoners hidden within Barad-dûr's dungeons, beings coerced into serving Sauron under threat of death. He could have prioritized their immediate liberation at the cost of slowing the assault, or he could proceed with full force to neutralize Sauron's defenses. Understanding that lives would be lost if he did not act decisively, he chose a dual approach. A small elite team, guided by his directives, moved covertly to rescue captives while the main force pressed forward. This decision underscored the delicate balance of principle and pragmatism that defined his presence in Middle-earth. As the coalition pressed deeper into the fortress, Sauron's will became more tangible, manifesting in shifting corridors, spectral illusions, and surges of malevolent energy. The Emperor, though limited in psychic projection, leveraged his understanding of tactics and psychology to counter these manipulations. He anticipated enemy movements, exploited vulnerabilities, and maintained cohesion among diverse forces. Humans, elves, and dwarves alike followed his lead with renewed confidence, their morale bolstered not only by his power, but by the evident fairness and precision of his command. The climactic confrontation came in the throne chamber, a vast expanse filled with shadow and pulsating energy. Sauron appeared not as a mortal form, but as a towering manifestation of malice, eyes burning with intent. The Emperor advanced with deliberate calm, recognizing that victory would not rely solely on physical might. He engaged in a combination of precise combat, psychological dominance, and tactical foresight. Sauron unleashed waves of destructive energy, yet the Emperor's anticipation, skill, and discipline allowed him to evade, counter, and redirect with surgical efficiency. In a crucial moment, the Emperor's restrained psychic sense detected the true nexus of Sauron's power, a convergence of will, malice, and the lingering influence of the One Ring. Destroying this nexus would risk destabilizing the very fabric of Middle-earth. He opted for precision, striking at the sources of corruption while preserving the underlying structure of the world. The battle unfolded as a dance of strategy and force, the Emperor demonstrating that immense power could be tempered with wisdom. Allies played their part, targeting weakened points and following his guidance to avoid unnecessary casualties. After hours of relentless combat, Sauron's physical manifestations faltered. The Dark Lord's spectral form dissolved into the shadows, and the eye, though still burning in the sky, dimmed as the nexus of power was disrupted. The fortress itself trembled, but remained intact, evidence that destruction had been controlled rather than indiscriminate. The Emperor, assessing the aftermath, ensured that remaining enemy forces were neutralized without unnecessary slaughter. His intervention had decisively altered the strategic and moral landscape of Middle-earth. Sauron's immediate threat was neutralized, yet the world itself had been preserved. In the days following the battle, the coalition consolidated control over the northern regions of Mordor. Allies repaired infrastructure, cared for civilians, and reinforced positions against any remaining dark forces. The Emperor, now fully integrated as a figure of authority and respect, refrained from dominating local leadership. Instead, he provided counsel, strategic oversight, and training, ensuring that Middle-earth's leaders could maintain autonomy while benefiting from his knowledge. He had not imposed rule, he had elevated capability and inspired resilience. Yet even in victory, questions persisted. Could a being of such immense power coexist with the natural flow of Middle-earth? Would the influence of the Emperor, though restrained and ethical, reshape destiny in ways unforeseen? The leaders recognized that the collision of universes was not merely a military matter, it was philosophical, ethical, and cosmic. The Emperor himself pondered these questions, acknowledging the limits of foresight, even for one who had commanded a galaxy-spanning civilization. His presence had brought salvation without tyranny, but the full consequences of his intervention would unfold over generations. Preparations for the return of the One Ring's influence, should it arise, and vigilance against lingering dark forces became priorities. The Emperor had demonstrated that even a being of unmatched power could operate with restraint, that victory did not require the annihilation of entire populations, and that strategy, intertwined with ethics, was the path to enduring results. Middle-earth had survived not because of overwhelming force alone, but because power was exercised with wisdom and moral clarity. A lesson that echoed through both worlds, bridging the gap between the 41st millennium and the realms of fantasy. The shadow over Middle-earth had lifted, though its memory remained etched into every mountain and river. The Emperor of mankind, the golden-armored stranger from a universe of endless war, had altered the course of history without supplanting it. His presence had reshaped the balance of power, elevated the courage and skill of allies, and demonstrated that immense strength need not corrupt. The coalition of elves, men, and dwarves had fought with newfound unity and confidence, inspired by a figure whose authority was tempered by moral clarity and strategic precision. Where fear and superstition once threatened to fracture them, discipline and example had fostered cohesion.